Hello gamers. With the recent, oh boy. Oh yeah, I didn't give you the weather report. It's 50 degrees and windy. Yeah, fall/early winter is here, my friends, finally. I think we've got one more day of about 60 to 65 degrees, and that's it. I still have my fucking summer tires on, for Christ's sakes. Almost Thanksgiving. Holy shit. Anyway, with the recent release of the dev blog about upcoming roadmap shit, which some of it they've delayed an entire year. We're a lot of people are talking about the Infiltrator rework again, or the proposed Infiltrator rework. Some people are happy, some people are upset. Yeah, the class has problems. The class is overtuned, power crept, and in a terrible state. And it's not fun to play against, and hasn't been fun to play against for several years now. That's what happens when you almost never nerf a class and you continually power creep everything to do with it. Not to mention, some of the tools that the class has are inherently, in a game that does zero balancing for scale whatsoever, some of the recon tools have always been problematic. And the only recon tool nerf I can ever think of was changing the original motion spotter. Instead of giving actual live real-time arrows of where people are, changing that to pulsing dots that update, I don't know, every 1 to 200 milliseconds or so. That's still really fucking good. Not much of a nerf. Yeah. But anyway, you guys are used to me reacting to Zealous. And this isn't going to be a real sit down at the desk and watch his whole video and record, because some of the stuff I agree with, as is most of the time the case. Some stuff I agree with people, even the people that I go after and make fun of historically on the channel. If I agree with you on some stuff, then there you go. But he dropped several takes about the Infiltrator rework that I disagree with. Imagine that. So I guess I'll play the clip in its entirety here. Make it so.
Where I want to lead into the Infiltrator change, which I am concerned is going to go down the same route of the people that wanted it addressed still have issues with it, and the people that actually enjoy it and have fun with it are left with a less fun class. Keep in mind, the majority of players that play Infiltrator are casual players. There is next to none, if no, good Stalker Infiltrators in terms of like kills per minute, and so their effectiveness relative to, say, for example, a Heavy Assault. You know, you can see this on the stat charts. All the good players are using Heavy Assault. None of them are really using Light Assault. Maybe like one. Again, maybe one Bolt Sniper, maybe. And that's pretty much it. So I don't really think it needs to get addressed, but I am happy that something's getting addressed in the infantry meta, rather than everything just being stale all the time. I do think that more value number changes would be nice, simply to make the game feel fresh when we log in and play, rather than just addressing one small part of the overall infantry balance, in this case, Infiltrator. Now, as the last...
All right, when it comes to the first point made in the little section that I gave you there, is the people that want it nerfed and have wanted it nerfed for a long time will probably still be dissatisfied with it, even though it gets nerfed. And it might still need things addressed. The people that want it nerfed, or have been calling for it being nerfed, will still be unsatisfied with whatever changes they do. And at the same time, the people that love the class and play the class all the time will just have a less fun time playing it. All right, so let's dive into that a little bit. When you have a Battlefield style game, one of the most problematic things with the class is always going to be basically invisibility in FPS games. Several games, even more recent titles, have tried to introduce this, and it's always a source of frustration for the player base at large, because it turns out that not being able to be seen, mostly, or being invisible is kind of a shit mechanic to be putting in an FPS game. And in general, it's generally fun to play as. And these the two most recent examples of games that have done this that I have actually played, the Finals had an invisible character, and X Defiant had a character with some invisibility. And they're frustrating characters to play against and play around. Now, those games, I don't know if they've ever been addressed, because honestly, I stopped playing those games relatively early on into their life, so I'm not really sure what they've done to those classes. But in general, putting invisibility into FPS games has historically been problematic, because it's extremely frustrating to fight against, especially in games that place a premium on positioning. And part of positioning is maneuvering yourself around the battlefield, buildings, objectives, and such, to get in a position to take gunfights. And invisibility carves out a big fucking huge chunk of the skill gap involved in that. Because if you're invisible, you're probably not going to get shot at, mostly. And the people who are playing the classes that aren't invisible are going to be the ones soaking up the damage and taking the bullets for you. And you get to pretty much move around willy-nilly for free, and ignore that part of the game, learning map layouts, because you have to functionally learn less about the game when people just can't see you. That's a fact. It's kind of the same. I used to have this argument with Deeg. Deeg always played Light Assault, and Light Assault is a class that you don't really have to learn the layout, the interior intricate details of the base in order to still be effective. And when I would watch Deeg play Light Assault, he would get on his jetpack, and especially when those stupid impulse grenades were added to the game, he would just fling himself across the map on rooftops and all of that shit, and ignore everything else going on around him, basically foregoing half the game, or more than half the game in terms of positioning. Light Assault allows you mostly to ignore a lot of positioning requirements. You still have to know probably about a quarter of the game with all the rooftops and stuff, but there's just things that you get to ignore. Infiltrator is sort of the same way. Not quite as an extreme example, but yeah, it's problematic. Being invisible. Invisibility will always be problematic. Not to mention, coming out of invisibility, depending on the game, any networked game, especially a game as poorly networked and as lenient in terms of network conditions as PlanetSide is, there's a big fucking potential for alpha damage coming out of Cloak from someone you can't see or can't initially see, or you're in another gunfight with someone and you don't know that the other guy's there because he's fucking invisible, and you might not have taken that gunfight with the first guy had you known that there was an invisible shitbag sitting right there waiting. That's a source of frustration for all players, including good players and bad players. Yeah, that's one of the main points. There was a Reddit post, I think yesterday, from a guy who's played the game not very long, maybe a couple weeks, and he made a post about Infiltrator, a rather enlightened fucking post for someone who has such little time playing the game. And one of his major points of frustration with the class was the baiting Infiltrator, the baiting invisible guy who's going to just shoot you in the back as soon as you get in a gunfight with another guy. Frustrating. And it's frustrating because invisibility exists. If the guy wasn't invisible, you could still complain about the guy baiting for the kill right there, but at least you could see and take into account that there is another player there. Whereas invisibility doesn't allow that. All right? So I think there is a point here that makes sense in Zealous's point, that whatever changes they do, and I agree with this, whatever changes they make will probably not satisfy the people who are hard charging for the changes that they want to the class. That's probably true, based on how Turdman has balanced shit out of the gate. We've got about a year worth of a catalog now in terms of this. We're probably going to be underwhelmed by the changes and still frustrated. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't still need work. That's called iteration. Iteration is a process where you continue to work on said thing over and over till you get it to a place that's satisfactory. And if they truly want to appease and lean into player feedback, we'll see how far that goes. All right. Now to the point in that first point about making the class just less fun to play, that's something that I addressed in my Infiltrator rework video that I made about 10 months ago now. Most people at the time, I'm not sure if it's the case now, but most people at the time were calling for a delay to fire out of cloak. Okay, especially, this is mostly pertaining to bolt action rifles, in my opinion, because getting one-shotted out of cloak is an extremely frustrating experience for the end user. And you'll find mostly that the entire Infiltrator kit is not an enjoyable experience, or it feels like an unhealthy experience for the player who is not playing the Infiltrator in this case. Whether you talk about radar, whether you talk about a radar which is exasperated by population imbalance, which will never be addressed ever, and you have to take into account in this game. Bolt action, one-shots out of cloak, and I think far to a lesser extent, depending on the weapon, automatics on Infiltrators out of cloak, which are still frustrating. I'm looking at you, NC Infiltrators, with the Gladius, the Cyclone, and the Tempest, etc. The alpha damage on those types of weapons are pretty fucking crazy coming out of cloak, especially if the guy can even remotely put his crosshair on you. Very annoying. Yeah. So the second point that he tried to make was about making the class just less fun for shitters, which is something I haven't historically cared about, but in this case, having played a class that has just been made nerfed over and over and over and over again to be just less fun, as in the heavy assault, I can sort of sympathize with that point of view. I do sympathize with it. So my changes were more focused around limiting what I found more problematic with the class. I left the one-shot out of bolt in the game, much to the chagrin of some people. I didn't put a fire delay out of cloak, much to the chagrin of some people. I could be convinced that that could be a good thing, but ultimately I think that a fire delay out of cloak makes the class feel a little bit too clunky. So my solution, or preliminary solution, to get around that clunkiness feeling was to just essentially nerf the uptime of the cloak. Less time you're invisible, the less time you can add that frustrating element into the game. So yeah, while I do partially agree with the point about making the class less clunky and less fun to play, at some point when you're addressing the Infiltrator class as a whole, there are just some things that are not fun to play against and need to be changed, regardless of whether or not a shitter or a casual will have less fun with it. All right, the second point he makes, the second main argument he makes is that no good players are playing Infil. All the good players are playing heavy. And shitters and casuals are the ones primarily playing Infiltrator. Well, that should tell you something, okay? And the reason why so many shitters and casuals enjoy Infiltrator is because it gives them access to skills and abilities that they otherwise wouldn't have playing any other class, mostly. The reason most good players are playing Heavy Assault, and have historically played Heavy Assault, is because yeah, there's a lot of spam in the game, a lot of explosive spam, big fights. A lot of these people are playing against groups and blobs of people, and just being able to take a little bit of additional extra damage really helps out. The guns are worse, the mobility's worse. The difference, though, is as a heavy assault, if you give a shitter, the same shitter who loves Infiltrator, a heavy assault, he still has to position, he still has to aim well, because he doesn't have the ability to be invisible. He doesn't have radar. He doesn't have all these tools that the Infiltrator class offers him. That's why I think you've seen a shift, and I've mentioned this many times before. There has been a shift in terms of what shitters and casuals are playing in the game over the year, from other classes to primarily playing Infiltrator, which is the point he's making. I have seen that in playing the game. It used to be that if you were fighting a guy you were just better than, as a heavy. He would switch to an LA with a shotgun, or way back in the day, he might switch to even a heavy assault. But the heavy assault has been nerfed so many times over the years that even your casual shitter can't make use of the heavy assault anymore. Not in the same way that he can make use of the Infiltrator kit. Like I said, if you can't aim or position, then switching to heavy assault doesn't do anything for you in the current game. If you can barely aim and barely position, then Infiltrator offers you a whole lot more upside than just being able to take sometimes 3 more bullets of damage. And in my experience, most players in that category, they don't want to fight me with heavy anymore. They all switch to Infiltrator. If you have ever played off hours, which is a point I have to make here, is that you guys that only log in during prime time and only play during prime time are missing the 21 other hours of the game where gameplay is still happening on the server. And Infiltrators are by far one of the most cancer, obnoxious fucking classes, especially if you are someone in lower pop at a base fight, playing against groups of players that have a bunch of Infiltrators playing. It's totally cancer. I have to run Sensor Shield 24/7, which means I lose half of my implant slots just because, or I have to run Sensor Shield, aka I have to use half of my allotted implant slot inventory just in case, or just because one player in the other group is playing this class. There is no other class in the game that you have to do this for. There is no other class in the game that forces you to use half of your implant slot just to partially, not even fully, counter one free given ability for a class. You don't have to do that. I think that's problematic because I would like to run other things instead of Sensor Shield in that second slot, but I can't because radar is so fucking pervasive and obnoxious, especially when fighting against groups. And all of you guys who sit in Zergs and run around blobbing everywhere, you will never understand this concept. And you will never be able to identify with or sympathize or empathize with players who deal with this. So don't really care about your opinion. People that log in to just play primetime ops have a very shallow view of the game. Whereas someone like me, who has played the game for 12 years and has played in every conceivable situation, I play in the big fucking fights, I play in the small fights, I play off hours, I play primetime. Despite what many of you try to think, that, oh, these are stats that you can only get at 1 to 12s, and weird how my stats translate instantly over to other games with balanced lobbies that have 32 and 64 players, and 128 players even. That's crazy. It's almost like the whole concept in the talking point of, well, you just playing 1 to 12 fights is completely bullshit. Anyway, yeah. Trying to make the point that mostly trying to compare stalker kill per minute with heavy assault is disingenuous, generally, and doesn't really have anything to do with what we're talking about here, especially in terms of balancing. Another reason why you cannot listen to shitters like Zealous and bad players when it comes to talking about balance, because they have a huge blind spot for shit that is objectively overpowered. Now, if you still think the heavy assault is objectively overpowered in the current year, then my advice to you is you just need to get better at the game because you're fucking clueless. The final point in that video clip that I showed is Zealous thinks that it doesn't need to get addressed. There's no reason to address anything with the Infiltrator. Well, if you're just completely blind and ignorant to the problems that actually exist, you're more than welcome to have your opinion. But there is a big, strong set and a large group of players who can actually see through the bullshit and doesn't just care about whether casuals or shitters are having fun playing an objectively overpowered, overtuned, and power-crept class. Once again, your opinion is irrelevant here. You can have your opinion, but when there are lines and scores of people lining up to give accurate, detailed information on why or how such a thing, in this case the class in and of itself, and the real problem is the kit and the class itself. That's what we're complaining about. If you took any time to try to understand any of the arguments, you might come along and learn something. But as we've learned historically, Zealous has a really hard time learning any lessons. He doesn't learn. I think it's maybe because of the group of players that he surrounds himself with. Of course, there's an extreme bias here. And you can say there's an extreme bias on my side, but you have to remember that I have played both sides of the game. I've played as a casual shitter and I've played as a good player. If you're just zealous and led a platoon or an outfit full of casual shitters and you've never actually talked to a good player, and you've never actually played with good players, you have a really hard time understanding their point of view. So yeah, it's something that doesn't need to be addressed. Well, man, I guess everybody that can make a coherent argument, which the class or group of people outside of this who make the argument that it's fine and doesn't need to be nerfed, have yet to make any coherent or cogent argument as to why it isn't problematic. And even the fucking developers somewhat agree, I guess, since they're going to be doing a rework. Now, we'll see what the rework entails. I have zero confidence that the rework or rebalance will actually address any of the real problems, because I'm not sure Turdman can identify actual real problems that exist within the game. And we've got, like I said, well over a year of time watching what they're fucking working on to see that there's not much hope. But anyway, this shit is well documented. Man. And you're going to see a lot more conversation about it coming up. More Reddit posts, more stuff like that. Go into those Reddit posts and read what actually smart and good players are typing about it. There's lots of YouTube content on it, I think, from people who know what they're talking about. Go back and watch the video I made about the Infiltrator rebalance from 10 months ago. Watch that video. I feel like I give a pretty fair breakdown of the things that are actually problematic that you really can't muster an argument against. At least from what I've seen so far. And also he goes into complaining about he wants more value changes perhaps, and he doesn't think it needs to be addressed, but he also admits that the infantry meta is completely stale. Well, part of the reason why the infantry meta is so stale at this point is because of this class in particular. Yeah, if you can't identify that, then I don't really understand why anyone should listen to you when it's blatantly fucking obvious. Yeah, I don't know who's still going to Zealous to get information about the things that we're talking about here. And again, guys, you have to stop listening. Stop listening to shitters when they try to talk about game balance. Because as you can tell, someone who is against nerfing the fucking overpowered, overtuned, and power-crept fucking class that is the Infiltrator in this game, if you're honestly arguing for that to be the way that it is, then you don't care about the health of the game, you don't care about class balance. They'll never come out and say that they don't care, because they are trying to convince you that they do, but they're just fucking wrong. So once again, if you want to address a stale infantry meta, then unfortunately that involves changing shit, and Infiltrator is on the top of the list. Probably second, next down, is the medic class. The medic class has been problematic for a long time. It probably leads to one of the most stale fucking metas the game has ever seen. I think the medic class makes the game more stale than even the Infiltrator class. So, but that's an issue for another time. Didn't see anything talked about the medic, and I'm sure I think the crying would be on a pretty equal level if you ever talked about actually addressing problems with the medic class. So that's it for me. I'll see you guys later.